Wichita, Kansas. It was the kind of place right in the middle of America where people felt safe. You knew your neighbors. You might leave your back door unlocked to let the dog out. It was quiet. It was normal. But hiding inside that normal picture was a secret. A very dark secret that was about to wake up. There was a man living there. He had a job. He went to church. Eventually, he became a Boy Scout leader and the president of his church council. He was the guy next door who complained if your grass was too long. He was the guy you would never look at twice. But inside his head, there was something else. He called it Factor X. He said it was a monster that lived in his brain. A monster that demanded terrible things. For 30 years, this man lived two completely different lives at the exact same time. In one life, he was a husband and a father. In the other, he was a shadow that terrified an entire city. This is the story of the man who fooled everyone, and the long, twisted road to find out who he really was. Before we dive deeper, let us know where you're watching from in the comment section. The nightmare started on a cold Tuesday morning in January 1974. The Otero family lived in a nice house in a quiet neighborhood. Joseph and Julie were the parents. They had 4 children. That morning, the 3 oldest kids went off to school. Joseph, Julie, and their 2 youngest children, 9-year-old Joey and 11-year-old Josephine, stayed home. Around 8:30 in the morning, a man cut the phone lines outside the house. He slipped inside. He had a gun, but he didn't want to use it. He just used it to scare them. He told the family he was a wanted criminal on the run, and he just needed food and a car. He told them if they did what he said, no one would get hurt. He lied. When the older Otero kids came home from school that afternoon, they found a house of horrors. Their parents and their little brother were tied up in the bedroom. They had been strangled. Their sister, Josephine, was found in the basement. It was a brutal, heartbreaking scene. The police were stunned. This wasn't a robbery. Nothing of real value was taken, just a radio and a watch. It wasn't a personal grudge. The Oteros were good people with no enemies. It looked like a professional hit, something you see in spy movies. The killer was calm. He took his time. He left almost no clues. For months, the police had nothing. The city was scared, but they thought maybe it was a one-time thing. A terrible, random tragedy. They were wrong. The man who did it was angry that he wasn't getting enough attention. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted the credit. 9 months later, in October, a strange letter was found hidden inside an engineering textbook at the Wichita Public Library. The letter was poorly typed, full of spelling mistakes. But the words were terrifying. The writer claimed he was the one who killed the Otero family. The police might have thought it was a prank, a sick joke. But the letter contained details that had never been released to the news. Details only the cops and the killer knew. The letter said, "I write this letter to you for the sake of the taxpayer, as well as your time. Those 3 dudes you have in custody are just talking to get publicity for the Otero murders. They know nothing at all. I did it by myself, ... The code words for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them, B2K. BTK, the name sent a chill through the city. It was a promise of what he did to his victims. Bind, torture, kill. Suddenly, Wichita realized they weren't dealing with a normal criminal. They were dealing with a predator who was hunting them, and then taunting the police about it. Paranoia took over the city. People who never locked their doors were now installing 3 deadbolts. Gun sales went up. If you heard a strange noise at night, you didn't just roll over. You lay awake, wondering if he was outside. And the shadow struck again. In April 1974, he attacked Catherine Bright. She was stabbed and strangled. Amazingly, her brother Kevin was there too. He was shot in the face, but he survived. He was the only person to ever lay eyes on BTK in the act and live to tell about it. But it happened so fast, and the trauma was so bad that his description was vague. He said the attacker was an average-sized guy with a bushy mustache and psychotic eyes. That description could fit thousands of men in Kansas in the 1970s. The police were chasing a ghost. In March 1977, 3 years after the first murders, the phone rang at the police station. A calm, flat voice on the other end said, "You will find a homicide at 843 South Pershing." Then he hung up. Police rushed to the address. They found the body of Nancy Fox, a young woman living alone. She had been strangled with nylon stockings. BTK had called in his own crime, just to make sure they knew it was him. He was getting bolder. He felt untouchable. A few months later, he sent another letter to a TV station. He asked, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" He was desperate for fame. He wanted the world to see him as a supervillain, like Jack the Ripper. While the city trembled, the man behind the mask was living a bizarrely normal life. During these years of terror, Dennis Rader graduated from college with a degree in criminal justice. He got married. He had 2 children, a boy and a girl. He got a job installing security systems. Think about that. The man who was breaking into homes and binding people up was the same man showing up at your house in a uniform to install your burglar alarm. He knew exactly how the systems worked because he was the one putting them in. He called this ability to live 2 lives cubbing. He said he could put his dark desires into a mental box, shut the lid, and go be a normal dad for a while. Then, when the urge struck, he would open the box and let the monster out. The police had absolutely no idea who they were looking for. They were looking for a loner, a drifter, someone who looked crazy. They weren't looking for a polite father of 2 with a steady job. The police were desperate. In 1984, they formed a special task force. They called themselves the Ghostbusters. Their job was to catch BTK. But it was an impossible task. This was before DNA testing was really a tool they could use to catch someone. There were no surveillance cameras on every corner. There were no cell phone pings to track. The task force collected thousands of tips. Every time a strange man looked at a woman the wrong way in a grocery store, someone called the cops. They had mountains of paperwork, but no solid leads. They had fingerprints from some scenes, but they didn't match anyone in the criminal database. They had semen samples, but they couldn't do anything with them yet. BTK continued to taunt them. He sent poems that gave clues about his crimes. He sent puzzles. He sent photocopies of his victims' driver's licenses, proving he was the killer. He was playing cat and mouse, and the mouse was winning. By 1979, BTK had killed 7 people. The city was exhausted from being afraid. In April of that year, he picked his next target, a 63-year-old widow named Anna Williams. He learned her schedule. He broke into her house and waited in the dark for hours. He had his hit kit with him, his ropes and tools. But that night, Anna decided to stop and visit her daughter after an evening of dancing. She came home hours later than usual. By the time she walked in the door, BTK was gone. He had grown impatient and angry waiting in the dark. He left, but he left something behind for her. When Anna got home, she found a neatly wrapped package on her bed. Inside were some of her own personal items that he had stolen earlier, and a poem he wrote called, "Oh, Anna, why didn't you appear?" She had missed a date with death by just a couple of hours. And then something strange happened. After the failed attempt on Anna Williams in 1979, the letters stopped. The phone calls stopped. The taunting stopped. The 1980s rolled on. There were other murders in Wichita, but none of them had that specific BTK signature, the binding, the torture, the arrogant letters. People began to whisper. Maybe he was dead. Maybe he got locked up for something else. Maybe he moved away. The police task force, the Ghostbusters, eventually disbanded. They had run out of clues. The files on BTK began to gather dust. The city slowly started to exhale. People started unlocking their doors again, but the mystery remained. You don't just turn off a monster like that. Serial killers don't usually just retire. Where did he go? He was still there. He was still watching. He was still going to work, still raising his kids, still sitting in the pews at church on Sunday morning. He didn't stop killing entirely. During those quiet years in the 80s and early 90s, he killed 3 more women. But he changed his style just enough that the police didn't immediately link them to BTK. He kept those murders for himself, secret projects that he didn't brag about to the media. He killed his neighbor, Maureen Hedge, in 1985. He killed Vicki Wegerle in 1986. His final victim was Dolores Davis in 1991. And then, for real this time, the killing stopped. 13 years went by with total silence from BTK. An entire generation grew up in Wichita, knowing him only as a scary campfire story from the past. By the year 2004, 30 years had passed since the Otero family was murdered. BTK was a cold case. Most people assumed the mystery would never be solved. The man who called himself BTK was now nearly 60 years old. His kids were grown up. He was looking forward to retirement. He had gotten away with it. The perfect crime spree. But there was one thing Dennis Rader couldn't handle. He couldn't handle being forgotten. In January 2004, a local newspaper ran a story about the 30th anniversary of the Otero murders. The article suggested that BTK was probably dead or in prison, and that's why the letters had stopped. Rader read that article, and his massive ego took a hit. He was furious. He wasn't dead. He was right there. The monster inside him woke up one last time. Not to kill, but to brag. He had to prove to the world that he was still the smartest person in the room. He decided to send a new message. It would be the biggest mistake of his life. The ghost was about to step out of the shadows, right into a trap he set for himself. March 2004. The silence broke. The Wichita Eagle newspaper received a letter. The return address on the envelope didn't make sense at first. It said the sender was Bill Thomas Kilman. Bill Thomas Kilman. Look at the initials. BTK inside the envelope. There wasn't a confession. There were photocopies of a driver's license. The license belonged to Vicki Wegerle, the woman murdered back in 1986. At the time, nobody knew for sure if BTK had killed her. Now he was sending proof. He had photos of her body that only the killer could have taken. The message was clear. I am still here. The police confirmed it. The serial killer had returned from the dead. But this time things were different. In the 1970s, the police were working with index cards and rotary phones. In 2004, they had DNA technology, computerized databases, and the Internet. Dennis Rader, sitting in his small home in Park City, Kansas, didn't understand that. He was stuck in the past. He thought he was still playing the game by the old rules. He thought he was smarter than everyone else. But his ego was blinding him. He was so desperate to be famous again, so desperate to control the story, that he began to make mistakes. Over the next 11 months, BTK led the police on a bizarre scavenger hunt. He didn't just mail letters. He left packages all over the city. He treated it like a spy movie. He would leave a package in a public park, or weigh it down with a tire iron in the back of a stranger's pickup truck. One of the strangest drops happened at a Home Depot. A man found a cereal box, Post Toasties, left in the bed of his truck. He almost threw it away as trash, but something felt heavy inside. When police opened the cereal box, they found a bound Barbie doll. They found sketches. They found a table of contents listing his crimes like he was writing a book. Rader was showing off. He wanted the police to admire his work. He even started giving his chapters titles, calling the murders the P.J. Projects or the era of the Snoopy. But while Rader was playing games, the police were setting a trap. They knew one thing about this killer. He loved to communicate. He loved the attention. If they could keep him talking, he would eventually slip up. The police decided to play along. They held press conferences where they spoke directly to BTK. They were polite. They treated him with respect. They wanted him to feel safe. They wanted him to feel like he was in charge. And Rader ate it up. He loved seeing the police chief on TV talking to him. Then Rader asked a question that would seal his fate. In one of his letters he asked the police, "Can I communicate with a floppy disk and not be traced to a computer?" He wanted to send his messages digitally, but he was afraid. He didn't understand how computers worked. He was a 59-year-old man who still used typewriters. The police saw their chance. They couldn't believe their luck. The killer was asking them for advice on how to hide. So the police lied to him. They placed a classified ad in the newspaper using the code name Rex, which Rader had asked them to use. The ad said, "Rex, it will be okay." The message meant, yes, you can send us a floppy disk. It's safe. We can't trace it. It was a trap. Any computer expert knows that digital files leave fingerprints. But Rader wasn't an expert. He trusted the police. He thought there was a code of honor between him and the lawman. February 16th, 2005. A package arrived at the KSAS-TV station in Wichita. Inside was a gold necklace, a photocopy of a book cover, and a purple floppy disk. The TV station called the police. The police took the disk to their computer lab. This was the moment of truth. They put the disk into a computer. They didn't look at the letters Rader had typed. They looked at the invisible data underneath the metadata. When you create a document on a computer, the software secretly records who created it and where it was saved. Rader thought he had deleted the files, but the computer remembered. The forensic officer clicked a few buttons, and there it was. The document had been last modified by a user named Dennis, and it had been saved at a location listed as Christ Lutheran Church. Dennis, Christ Lutheran Church. It took seconds to connect the dots. A quick search revealed that the president of the Christ Lutheran Church Council was a man named Dennis Rader. Pulled up his driver's license photo. They saw a normal-looking man. Balding, glasses, a mustache. He looked like a grandfather. They looked at his address. He lived in Park City. He worked as a compliance officer, the dog catcher, and code enforcer. Suddenly, everything clicked. The man who measured people's grass, the man who was obsessed with rules, the man who had access to people's backyards, but they couldn't arrest him just yet. They needed to be 100% sure. Dennis is a common name. They needed DNA. They discovered that Dennis Rader had a daughter, Carrie. She was a grown woman now, living her own life. The police found out that Carrie had visited a medical clinic at her university years earlier for a routine checkup. The clinic still had her DNA on file. The police got a warrant. They took the daughter SDN, a sample, and compared it to the semen found at the crime scenes from the 1970s. They didn't tell Carrie. They didn't tell Dennis. They ran the test in secret. The results came back. It was a familial match. The DNA at the crime scene belonged to Carrie's father. Dennis Rader was BTK. The ghost had a name. February 25th, 2005. Dennis Rader left his office to go home for lunch. He was driving his car. He had no idea the sky was about to fall. A long line of police cars pulled up behind him. Lights flashed. He pulled over, probably thinking he had a broken taillight. An officer walked up to the window with a gun drawn. Rader looked at the officer. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just said, "Officer, I think I'm the one you're looking for." He surrendered immediately. The monster gave up without a single punch being thrown. In the interrogation room, the detectives prepared themselves for a battle. They expected Rader to lawyer up. They expected him to deny everything. Instead, Rader did something shocking. He started talking, and he wouldn't stop. He was actually proud. For hours he drank coffee and ate snacks while he told the police exactly how he killed 10 people. But he didn't tell the story like a madman. He told it like a bored office manager giving a presentation. He described the murders in a flat, monotone voice. He corrected the police on small details. "No, I didn't use that knot," he would say. "I used a slip knot." It worked better. He complained about his victims. He said they were uncooperative. He talked about putting them down like they were sick animals. When the detectives asked him why he trusted them about the floppy disk, Rader looked genuinely hurt. He looked at the detective and said, "I need to ask you, how come you lied to me?" He was a serial killer who had tortured children, yet he was upset that the police hadn't told him the truth about computer technology. The arrest shattered his family. His wife of 34 years had no idea. She thought he was a bit odd, maybe a bit moody, but she never suspected he was a killer. She filed for an emergency divorce immediately. His daughter, Carrie, and his son had to face the impossible truth. The dad who took them camping, the dad who taught them to fish, was a monster who strangled people for fun. The people at his church were sick to their stomachs. The man who collected the offering plates on Sunday was the same man who had bound and tortured women on Saturday. The mask had fallen off completely. At his hearing, Rader stood before the judge to plead guilty. Usually, this is a somber moment. But Rader treated the courtroom like his stage. He described every murder in graphic detail. He used words like hit, kit, and trolling. He made hand gestures to show how he tied the ropes. At one point, the judge had to tell him to stop rambling. Rader didn't seem to understand the gravity of what he was saying. He didn't show a single ounce of remorse. No tears for the victims. No apology to the families. Just a cold, hard recount of his achievements. It was the banality of evil. He wasn't a supernatural demon. He wasn't a genius. He was just a pathetic, narcissistic man who wanted to feel powerful. Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, 175 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never walk free again. He sits in a solitary cell for 23 hours a day. In the end, the Factor X he talked about, the monster in his brain, was nothing more than his own selfishness. He terrorized Wichita for 30 years. He made people afraid of the dark. He made neighbors suspect neighbors. But when the lights finally turned on, the boogeyman turned out to be a man named Dennis. A man who got caught because he didn't know how to use a floppy disk. The city of Wichita could finally sleep again. The doors that had been triple locked for 3 decades could finally be opened. The nightmare was over.